you grew up in a Christian family?
Yeah, I actually grew up in a Christian family. So being a Christian family actually made me presume a lot of stuff. Made me presume that I was Christian actually. Okay, let me qualify that a little bit also, because I suppose when I was growing up as a Christian, I said prayers before every meal, said prayers before we park our cars, said prayers before we go to bed. But I had little knowledge of who God is, honestly. That's because I didn't open my Bible, and I didn't read the words that came from the Bible, God's word itself. And it's ironic because growing up in a Christian family, you would know at least who God is. But I suppose that wasn't a part of the culture that I grew up with back home, at least. It was only much later when I started to read the Bible that got me to be convicted of God's truth.
Okay. So you grew up, I assume that means you grew up in Sunday school, in youth as well. What was that experience like?
So, I honestly can't remember anything in Sunday school except for coloring. Coloring, making art and craft. Some stories here and there. But I suppose it wasn't ingrained in me. To really remember certain points about God or certain attributes about God in Sunday school. I just learned stories. I couldn't remember the point that was made. And I think sometimes the stories that were told, they didn't come from like reading the Bible itself. It just came from like pictures and things like that. That sometimes could be inaccurate, or rather the kind of impression I got from the pictures depicted an inaccurate image of God or the stories of the Bible. And growing up in that way, I think, looking back in hindsight, I actually didn't really learn about who God was or who He was. And even growing up in youth, I think in youth we had a lot of activities, just like any youth would want to have, right? Activities. But I also don't remember very clearly that I opened the Bible and studied it deeply. It was activities after activities. Then there was always the year-end camp that everyone was looking for because that was the fun thing to do. It was mostly those. Those were like the very core memories that I have of Sunday school and youth. But there isn't much of the Bible, I would say, that really struck me. The reasons why I stayed in youth, or the reasons why I loved youth, weren't because of God. The reasons why I loved youth was because of myself. You know, put it that way. It's looking back, it's really, as a reflection, it was just a club, basically. We for sure talked about God here and there, but we weren't really serious about God. So that's my experience from Sunday school and youth, growing up in a Christian home. Actually those were some of the experiences I had.
Okay, so I know that you eventually got quite involved in ministry in youth in your previous church, right? What was that experience like? You were leading groups, you were reading the Bible with people, right?
So actually, I suppose in church there is a culture of serving. And being a part of the culture means being assimilating in the activities. So I would naturally want to serve. So that was very much earlier on when I didn't have a very developed understanding of the gospel. I just continued to serve in ministry, just thinking that was the way things should be in church. It was the right thing to do, but I didn't understand why. I didn't ask myself why very often. And it was only until much later that I got even more involved in youth and even serving in ministries, because when I took the gospel seriously, when I began to take the gospel seriously, that's when I saw that there was there was a famine, a gospel famine.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, when I started to read the words of the Bible more, I could see that the problems that arise from just doing activities or just doing things as usual,
Yeah.
they don't really get to the heart or the message of the gospel. I started to see myself as part of this ministry.
Yeah.
I wanted to just be involved in God's work, be
Yeah.
involved in teaching people the Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't remember anything else apart from wanting to tell people of this truth.
Yeah.
And that's when I started to get myself involved in everything. Like
Yeah.
this ministry, get involved, this ministry, get involved. My key focus was teach people the Bible, teach people God. That's what they need to know. And I suppose being involved in so many things is actually a good thing, because I started to see that across all the ministries that I was involved in, across all age groups, there was a similar problem. It was gospel famine. There wasn't enough of teaching of who God is. And that's why I got involved in parachurch ministries, in my university fellowship, Christian fellowship. Got involved in Sunday school, got involved in youth, got involved in cell group, did a lot of one-on-ones with people. So those are the kind of the efforts that I tried to put in order to grow the ministry.
Right.
Yeah.
How did you discover Reformed theology?
This is a pretty long story. My church back then, I actually grew up in a church that had Reformed roots, and there were Reformed teachings, but I suppose the culture back then was that whatever that was taught, they weren't applied very seriously. It was just, it's a good reminder, or it was good to know.
Yeah.
So that kind of culture sort of became like a veil over my eyes. I could hear things like predestination, but I'll reject it in my bones, that kind of thing. Reformed teaching was something that was taught on the pulpit, actually, and I just couldn't hear any of it. So when you ask me when I was introduced to Reformed teaching, it was in the church that I grew up with. But I suppose like how it started to enter my heart, or how I started to receive Reformed teaching, was when I was actually confronted of whether I knew what I believed. So it was actually in university ministry where someone from CRC, I'll give you a hint, he's a pretty tall guy. He read the Bible with me, and he basically sat me down and asked me, who is Paul? Right. So at first, this is how bad my Bible knowledge is, right? I grew up in a Christian home. I grew up in a church. But at university time, when I was asked who was Paul, I was like, Paul? My friend Paul, or Paul? Who is Paul? I don't know. Why are you asking me who is Paul? Should I know who Paul is? I didn't know the name Paul. That was how bad my knowledge of the Bible was. So when he asked me who was Paul, I found it so perplexing that I started to question whether I know anything about the Bible. So I started to read. Of course, I didn't know how to read. I was just like reading randomly. And I was like, who is this Paul? I don't know who this Paul is. He was just some fella, right? And the question that was always posed to me back then in university was, who is Paul, and why is it important to know who he is? I really couldn't answer that question, and I literally spent an entire semester in university, because we have like Bible studies, right? The whole semester, I spent like 5-6 months just working on 4 verses of 1 Corinthians. That I would say that was quite a pivotal moment in my life, because I was humbled by scriptures. It was just the words there. Nothing fancy, no like sudden realization or like some experience, the apple fell from the tree or whatever, but I just looked at the words of the Bible and I was asked by my fellow brother, who is Paul? Or what does the first 4 verses of the Bible or of 1 Corinthians mean? And that just got me so disturbed. I was like, how do you even work out what it means? And I don't even understand, if I can't even understand the first 4 verses, how am I going to understand the breadth of the knowledge of the Bible? And that got me to really think about whether I understood what Christianity was. That's the starting point, I would say.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the starting
What happened
point.
after that? How did you end up in CIC then?
So actually, initially, I was very against CRC. I even went around telling people not to go to CRC because it was so radical, it was so different. It was crazy in that people opened up their laptops to write down stuff. I really did feel like CRC was like brainwashing people. Right? I was telling people that CRC was brainwashing you also, and I was almost a victim. I was telling people that, right? So I didn't have a good impression of CRC. Mainly because I have a lot of friends that told me that CRC is dangerous, right? Some of those words were like very strong. I had friends from college that came to Monash with me as well, and they were warning me actually because they said they had friends that also had interactions with people in CRC, and they are just like a whole different level. They are very radical. They talk about controversial topics. They would shut you down because they would say, is that what the Bible is saying? So to me, I heard all those things and I had a bad impression of CRC. I didn't want to be in CRC. I didn't want to go near CRC even. I was afraid of like meeting anyone in CRC and being brainwashed as well. So I just distanced myself. But it was only until I was in university, I started to join the university fellowship there, Monash Christian Fellowship. Shout out to you. That's where I met a lot of the people from CRC.
Yeah.
So initially my impression of CRC was like dangerous, brainwashing and whatnot. When I met people in MCF that were from CRC, they were so friendly, they were so nice. They were completely opposite from what people were saying. So I thought, okay, hey, let me give it a chance. Let me just get to know them. And I started talking to them. But I only started to enter or go into CRC when after reading the Bible with this guy, I started to see that I needed to know how to read the Bible. And there was one thing that I had to admit, even though I didn't like or had a bad impression of CRC, was that CRC guys knows their Bible really well. They don't just pull things out of their own head and then they explain. They literally say, what does the Bible say? Let's open and flip the Bible together, right? If I go to someone and ask them, what does the Bible say about tattoos? Right, that kind of question as a youth. Then normally the pastor will say, this is a very interesting topic. Then he'll talk. But when I ask this question to CRC, they'll say, okay, let's open to this chapter. Let's read it together. Let's work it out and see what God says. And if you have a different opinion, that's fine. But we have to be faithful to what the Bible says. And that really that was so bizarre to me at the time. That was so bizarre. But that was the steps that I started to take, moving towards CRC more and more, because I had to admit that CRC was being objective, as opposed to what my friends would say. My friends would say dangerous, or like cult-like even. They would say things like that. Brainwashing. No, none of that. All I got was good discipline, asking me what the Bible was saying. And that was when I started to have more exposures in CRC. Yeah, more and more exposures in CRC. But I remember that my first encounter in CRC, I was invited by a friend, also from CRC, to attend one of the Bible studies. So I just stumbled upon one of the Bible studies, like Chinchay lah. Just showed up at one of the Bible studies. The Bible studies was 3 hours long. Can you imagine? 3 hours. But what I was used to was half an hour. Can you imagine? But those 3 hours, I remember sitting through that 3 hours being utterly confused. In a good way. Utterly confused in a good way. Because when they were talking about God, they really wanted to figure out what the Bible was saying. I looked at my this other person. He wasn't my friend at the time. I looked at my friend and said, "Do you understand what's being taught?" And he was like, "No, I'm trying to figure out. I also don't know." I look at everyone. Everyone was also practically looking at the Bible and then like, "How do you answer this?" And the Bible study leader was basically getting us to asking us a lot of questions for us to work out what the Bible actually is saying. And the whole 3 hours, there weren't answers. Unlike your Malaysian education system, they always gave you answers.
Yeah.
But here in this Bible study, it was asking more questions, and had even more questions after the Bible study than answers. Yeah. And the 3 hours, I felt I was so unproductive. I felt like I didn't learn anything. But I went back remembering, like, this impression was very strong in me when I first attended that Bible study. It was that CRC guys, they really love the Bible. They really, really love the Bible. And even my friends I was telling you about just now, that used to say that CRC is dangerous, I told this story to them. I said I went and visited the Bible study and they really love the Bible. Then they would say something to me and say, "Yeah, exactly. They love the Bible more than they love people." And I was like, that's true, right? You know, like my naive mind, I would just think, yeah, these CRC people, they just read the Bible, they don't know how to love people, and correct. Then there was another story lah. Like I was like stepping closer to CRC, and when my friends told me that, then I stepped away from CRC as well. So there was my life. I had like a up and down, had this kind of like just drama happening here and there. But I'm really glad that God showed me and revealed to me that CRC was being faithful to the word, and that matters. That matters the most. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when was that again? 2017.
Wow, that was 2016.
Wow.
2016.
Okay. So you started coming to GG regularly first, is it?
I started coming to sermons. It was the Luke series then.
Yeah.
I remember coming for the Luke series, and the sermons was infamously around, all my friends were saying, really long. So the Luke series that I went for, the first sermon I went for was, I don't remember which particular sermon, but it was the Luke series. It was 3 hours long. It was actually more, I think 4 hours. I sat through the first 20 minutes and I died already. I was like so tired. I fell asleep. My brain it couldn't accept any more information. What was funny was that after 1 hour, then Pastor Robin would say, "Oh, that was my introduction." I was like, what? My pastor from my church previously would finish his whole sermon in half an hour, but his introduction is 1 hour, so that's different. But when I first came for the sermons, I really wanted to figure out what God was saying from His Word, and that's what matters. I kept coming because of that reason. I kept pushing myself, even though 20 minutes was my max. But week on week, I kept working at scriptures. I really wanted to know what the Gospel of Luke was saying. I kept working at it, and when I came for the sermon the next week, I had a better grasp because I had done the prep work. I was eager to learn. I was eager to know who God is. And when I came for the next week, I could sustain for 45 minutes. Well, I mean, it was like 2 times more than my 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But as I came continually, I could start to see that there is a pattern of thinking in the way that the sermon is preached that helps me to see what the Bible was saying.
Yeah.
And I think about attending about 1-2 months later on, I could understand about 50% of the sermon already, or I could my attention span was much longer. So it's a matter of discipline as well, I suppose. Growing up in a Christian background, I suppose I wasn't taught this discipline of learning and seeing the words of the Bible, and basically just being literate, if I want to put it that way. I think that's very important for anyone growing up in a Christian home, to develop these skills, to read more, to think more, to talk about it, to articulate these thoughts more as well.
Yeah.
So in CRC, when I attended the sermons, I suppose that was the culture that I started to appreciate a lot more, and that's become a part of me. Yeah, I suppose that's one of the things that I take back from back then as well.
Yeah. How do you think you've grown in CRC throughout the past 5 years in the sermon series, the GG's, membership course even? How do you think you've grown?
Ooh. I've grown so much. Is that cheating to say if I say just
Yes.
yes, yeah. I think I've grown. I've grown in so many ways that it's impacted my every moment in life. Normally, I would used to think that church or Christianity was something I'm always struggling with. Like, okay lah, I feel guilty. I don't devote my life to God. But Christianity and churching was mostly a Saturday, Sunday thing. It was a weekend activity as I was growing up, at least my idea of what Christianity was. But when I started to go for the series, I went for Luke, I went for the spirituality series as well. I went for the BT series. Wow, that was amazing.
Yeah.
I went through all these series, Matthew even. They taught me a lot about how to be a disciple of Jesus. And just like how I would watch like all those Shaolin monks or Kung Fu, they always had a Sifu, and they always had disciples. What the disciples really wanted or really want is Sifu's teachings, or to be like their Sifu, or even better, right? But when I think of myself as a disciple, I want to be like Christ. I want to learn everything that he's saying, everything that he's teaching as well. And basically, discipleship, especially in Matthew, I think it confronted a lot of my own sins and temptations and struggles in life. I wanted to live my own comfortable life. I wanted to go overseas and just work out my own life of comfort. I wanted to live happy with a lot of money, doing my own thing. But I suppose all these sermon series, like Matthew even especially, has taught me about discipleship, what it means to take up my own cross and follow Jesus. So that was really one of the I suppose the mode, the sermons the past 5 years have really taught me about how to be Christian, to live my life as a Christian. It's far from the truth when people say that CIC is all about content and no love. That cannot be further away from the truth. The education of the gospel here in Malaysia, I think, hasn't really gotten straight into people's hearts. Right? It hasn't been enough of teaching about who God is and what it means for your life. It has probably turned a little bit into customs, and many of my friends have turned nominal even. And it's just Christian by name. How do you live as a Christian? Go to church every week. But there's no radical call for discipleship, as Jesus calls us all to be his disciples. And I think that's a severe problem that we need to be able to address as Christians as well.
Yeah.
So my fellow brothers and sisters who are just thinking that the life of a Christian is just going to church every Sunday, or just living in their own little bubble, having a sort of secular sacred divide. Sunday is for church, the rest of the days are not for God. I mean, I think that needs to change. we need to all think about our lives completely for God. And that's what I really want. That's what the past 5 years have also taught me to do, is to take heed of the call from Jesus our Lord for discipleship, to carry on the commissioning. And that's what I would say in a summary fashion lah. There's so much more I want to share about the past 5 years, but I would say being a disciple is what has really my key takeaway from the past 5 years. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned earlier on, a few years ago, you were compelled to think that CRC cared more about the Bible than loving people. So, since you've been here in CRC for about 5 years plus now, what do you think about the way CRC loves?
Well, the first thing that struck me when my friends told me that CRC loves the Bible more than people was I thought it was true. But when I really thought about love as a category, right? Love as a word. How do we understand love? Culturally speaking, of course, from Korean dramas, I watch a lot of Korean dramas with my family.
Yeah.
I suppose the notion of love came mainly from that. Even from Hollywood, even from TV, or even just the culture I grew up in. Love is all about pampering you or going all the way out sacrificially for this person. Just love is defined in those terms. They are very human terms, very emotionally driven, I would say. But I think CRC, when you think about emotions, right, they fluctuate and they change over time. Your love for something, if it's dependent on your feelings about something, it will sizzle out and fade. But what CRC does is to really understand love from God's point of view. Right? Think about who created love. Why do we have emotions? Why do we have feelings? Why do we have this sense of wanting to worship something? It's God has created us as beings to love. But love in a way that is defined by culture is not God's way of learning or loving even.
Yeah.
I think CRC does this well. They teach you how to love God's way. And loving God's way means being truth bearers.
Yeah.
Speaking truth to one another. It hurts for sure. Like, I can tell my girlfriend, your boyfriend, whoever, the truth about something, and they might not like it, and they say, "Why don't you love me?" But that can't be. Yeah, that can't be true, right? Love is defined by truth first and foremost.
Yeah.
It cannot be on something that shifts, especially your emotions. And that has really helped me, like being in the past 5 years in CRC, has helped me to define or redefine love. I had a lot of baggage, a lot of my own notions of what love is. Even today, I still have my own notions of love. Culture keeps coming and creeping in on how love is or how love should be. But I think going back to the scriptures and looking at it from God's point of view has certainly reformed my mind, has really changed my understanding of how I receive love and how I communicate love as well. I think observing just the things in church. I was just having this conversation with you, right, in the car. Even the cleaning, the cleaning duty in church is a measure of love. Like CRC takes pride in cleaning duties being fully Christian, right? Fully, all our church members are as part of the cleaning duty. We don't hire someone that is not Christian because we think that being part of a church means being one body and many parts.
Yeah.
And in that way, love is expressed in everyone coming together and using their gifts in different ways. I think that was really encouraging to me because when I could see little things like that coming to life, little things like that, like who likes to clean the toilet? It's smelly, it's dirty, it's everything. But when I see church members doing it willingly and doing it out of love, that is really a testament to the gospel taking root in their hearts. So I think when people say things like CRC loves the Bible more than people, What? It doesn't make sense. They love people. They love God. They love the Bible. I think that's one thing that I would want to tell my friends. I mean, I not really much on not really in touch with them anymore, but that's one thing I would like to correct my friends whenever they say that about CRC. So
Yeah.
CRC is a very loving church.
Yeah.
It's a very loving church. Are we going underneath here?
Sure.
Oh no.
You mentioned that, in light of the gospel famine that you've observed here in Klang Valley, you want to serve in the Klang Valley as a full-time paid minister. What are your plans for that, and why do you choose to go down that path?
So every time I tell people that I want to do a full-time ministry, people are like perplexed. People are quite confused as to why I would want to do something like that.
Yeah.
So I think the simple answer to that is it's nothing complicated. It's just that I see the need. As I was mentioning earlier as well, the harvest is plentiful, yet the laborers are few. That verse just struck me and made me realize that I want to do this. Okay lah, when I first had a revelation that I didn't know how to read the Bible, and when I could start to read the Bible for myself and understand the gospel from scriptures, that moment already made me, I want to teach people the Bible. For my whole life, whatever it takes, I want to do it. So it didn't take me a lot of consideration as to whether I should do it or not. It was quite immediate that when I heard the gospel, I wanted to tell everyone about it. All the days of my life, every moment. That kind of like first encounter with the gospel, first encounter with God. I remember Isaiah 6. Isaiah 6, when God is holy, 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 and God asks Isaiah, like, who will go out before me? And Isaiah said, me, take me. And that's part of like how I saw my own Christian experience, in wanting to pursue full time as well. I just want to be a servant of God, in any way that I can, and if that takes the form of being a full time paid minister, I see that as one of the, as Paul mentions, that's the greater gift, right? Wanting to teach the Bible, and it is a very difficult position to be in because you are leading God's people with the truth, and if you don't get the truth right, man, you're gonna lead people astray. That of course stresses me out. That's like, oh man, that's such a difficult job to do. But it's in light of seeing or coming from a background that there wasn't much of the gospel being preached, at least clearly. There isn't much of the gospel being taught in a way that calls people to change in their lives, that I see something must be wrong that must change. So that's why I decided to take on this step to serve God, to be a servant of His, to be a humble servant, to also address some of the concerns that I have looking and growing up in Christianity here in Malaysia. It's basically seeing that what Malaysia needs is more ministers, more word ministers. And if we have like a lot of word ministers, we need more, even more, right, to do more mission work as well. So, simple answer, I don't know if that's a simple answer, but my desire to want to do full-time paid ministry is strongly tied to when I first heard the gospel. Yeah. Hey, where you park your car?
No, I'm driving my dad's car.
We were looking for your car just now. Okay. Ciao, bro.
Bye.
That's Jay Chow, part of Monash Ministry too.